In the heart of a bustling city stood an ancient palace, its towering spires and golden accents catching the sunlight like a beacon of history. The palace was surrounded by wide cobblestone streets, where tourists from all over the world strolled, cameras in hand, eager to capture the grandeur of the royal residence. Families with children were especially drawn to the gates, not just because of the palace's beauty, but also because of the iconic figures who stood guard outside. Royal guards dressed in striking uniforms that seemed straight out of a storybook. The guards were impossible to miss. Their bright red coats, polished black boots, and tall bearskin hats made them look larger than life. Each guard stood perfectly still, their posture rigid and faces expressionless, as though they were statues carved from stone rather than living, breathing humans. Tourists often gathered around them, snapping photos or marveling at their discipline. Parents would whisper to their kids, "Don't bother them. They're not allowed to move or talk." Most children listened, staring wide-eyed at the towering figures, but some couldn't resist testing the limits of what they'd been told. One sunny afternoon, a young boy named Oliver joined his family on a visit to the palace. At 6 years old, Oliver had a mind full of questions and a heart full of curiosity. He tugged at his mom's sleeve as they approached the gates, pointing excitedly at one of the guards. "Why doesn't he move?" Oliver asked, his voice loud enough for nearby tourists to overhear. His mother smiled and knelt down to explain. "They have a very important job," she said gently. "They'd protect the palace, and part of their job is to stand still and stay serious, no matter what." Oliver tilted his head, studying the guard intently. The man standing before him looked impossibly tall, his uniform gleaming under the sun. His face was stern, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as though nothing in the world could distract him. But Oliver wasn't convinced. Are they even real? He wondered aloud, earning a few chuckles from the crowd. His dad ruffled his hair and said, "Of course they're real, buddy. They're just really good at their job." Despite the explanation, Oliver's curiosity only grew stronger. As his parents busied themselves taking pictures of the palace gates, he wandered closer to the guard, his small sneakers scuffing against the cobblestones. The guard didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even seem to notice the boy inching nearer. To Oliver, this was fascinating. How could someone stand so still for so long? Was it magic? Or maybe they weren't human at all. Determined to find out, Oliver decided to investigate further. He circled the guard slowly, inspecting every detail, the shiny buttons on his coat, the way his gloved hands rested perfectly atop the rifle slung across his chest, the faint shadow cast by his towering hat. The more he looked, the more he became convinced that something about this guard wasn't quite right. Maybe the stories his parents told were true, or maybe there was more to this mysterious figure than met the eye. Whatever the case, Oliver knew one thing for sure. He wasn't leaving until he got some answers. Oliver's curiosity was like a spark that refused to fade. Standing just a few feet away from the towering guard, he squinted his eyes and tilted his head, as if trying to solve a puzzle. The guard, Captain Thomas Reed, was completely still, his face set in an expression so serious it almost looked carved out of stone. To Oliver, this was both fascinating and slightly confusing. How could someone stand so still for so long without even twitching? He decided to take matters into his own hands. "Are you real?" Oliver asked loudly, his voice ringing out in the crisp afternoon air. Tourists nearby turned their heads, some laughing softly at the boy's boldness. A few parents exchanged amused glances, whispering how children always seemed to ask the most unexpected questions. But Captain Reed didn't react. Not a single blink, not a shift in stance. He remained as rigid as ever, staring straight ahead as though Oliver wasn't even there. This only fueled Oliver's determination. If the guard wasn't going to respond, then maybe he needed to try harder. Spotting a small stick lying on the ground, Oliver picked it up and poked it gently against the shiny black boot of the guard. Tap, tap, tap. Still nothing. The guard didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even glance down. It was as though Oliver was prodding a statue instead of a person. Other kids who had been watching curiously began to gather around, drawn by Oliver's antics. One little girl giggled and said, "Maybe he's a robot." Another boy chimed in, "No way, robots don't wear hats like that." Soon, a small crowd of children formed around the guard, all of them staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. Inspired by Oliver's bravery, a few of them started mimicking the guard's stiff posture. They stood as tall as they could, puffing out their chests and holding their arms stiffly by their sides. Some even tried balancing sticks on their shoulders, pretending they were rifles. The adults nearby couldn't help but laugh. Parents filmed the scene on their phones, while tourists paused their sightseeing to watch the adorable spectacle. The contrast between the stern, towering guard and the playful, giggling children was impossible to ignore. It was like watching a group of tiny sparrows chirping around a stoic eagle. But Oliver wasn't done yet. He stepped back, studying the guard carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. Then something struck him. Maybe the guard wasn't ignoring them because he was a robot or a statue. Maybe he was simply following rules. Rules that said he couldn't smile, laugh, or even acknowledge the kids. That thought made Oliver feel a little sorry for him. After all, standing so still for hours on end didn't seem fun at all. Determined to make the guard's day a little brighter, Oliver reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny origami crane he'd made earlier that morning. He'd folded it during the car ride to the palace. Proud of how neat and colorful it turned out, holding it up to the guard's visor, Oliver said softly, "This is for you." His voice carried a sincerity that caught the attention of everyone nearby. The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet hush as people waited to see what would happen next. For a moment, nothing changed. The guard remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. But deep inside, Captain Reed felt something stir, a warmth he hadn't expected. This little boy, with his big brown eyes and kind gesture, had managed to pierce through the walls of discipline and tradition. And though Reed knew breaking character was against the rules, he couldn't ignore the genuine effort Oliver had made to connect with him. What happened next would surprise everyone and leave a lasting impression on both the guard and the boy. The silence that followed Oliver's gesture felt like it stretched for hours, even though it was just a few seconds. The little boy stood there, holding up the delicate origami crane with both hands, his eyes wide and hopeful. The crowd of tourists and children watched intently, their curiosity now tinged with anticipation. Would the guard respond? Could he respond? Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for what might happen next. Captain Thomas Reed felt the weight of all those eyes on him. He had spent years mastering the art of stillness, learning how to tune out distractions and remain focused no matter what happened around him. But this moment was different. This wasn't just another tourist testing his resolve or a child poking fun at his uniform. It was something far more personal. The tiny paper crane dangling in front of his visor wasn't just a trinket. It was an act of kindness, a bridge between two worlds that rarely crossed paths. Inside, Thomas wrestled with his training. His mind screamed at him to stay still, to ignore the gift and maintain the stoic demeanor expected of him. Breaking character wasn't just frowned upon, it was forbidden. Yet, as he looked down at Oliver's earnest face, he couldn't bring himself to dismiss the gesture. It would take only a second, just one small movement, to acknowledge the boy's effort without causing too much disruption. Slowly, deliberately, Thomas lowered his gloved hand from its rigid position atop his rifle and reached out. The moment his fingers brushed against the fragile paper, a ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. Adults whispered in disbelief, while children clapped excitedly. He moved. One kid exclaimed, pointing at the guard. "He's real," shouted another. Cameras flashed furiously as people scrambled to capture the unexpected interaction. For the first time in years, Captain Reed broke his unyielding posture, and it wasn't because someone had tripped or fallen near him, nor because of any official command. It was because of a 6-year-old boy who refused to see him as anything less than human. Thomas carefully accepted the origami crane, inspecting it briefly before giving Oliver the tiniest nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't much, a mere dip of his chin, but it spoke volumes. To Oliver, it meant everything. His face lit up with pride and joy, and he grinned so widely it seemed like his cheeks might burst. "You're welcome," he said cheerfully, waving enthusiastically before running back to his parents. The crowd erupted into murmurs of approval. Some parents praised Oliver for his bravery, while others complimented the guard for his subtle but meaningful response. A few tourists even approached the other guards nearby, asking if they could also try interacting with them. Word quickly spread among the visitors that one of the guards had actually responded to a child, sparking debates about whether such moments should be encouraged or discouraged. Was it breaking tradition, or was it simply reminding everyone that behind the uniforms were real people? Meanwhile, Captain Reed returned to his original stance, standing tall and immovable once again. On the surface, nothing appeared to have changed. He was still the same towering figure guarding the palace gates. But inside, something shifted. That brief exchange with Oliver reminded him why he had chosen this role in the first place, not just to protect the palace, but to serve as a symbol of strength and trust for the community. And in that fleeting moment, he realized that sometimes serving others meant stepping slightly outside the lines, even if it was just to accept a paper crane from a kind-hearted child. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden rays over the cobblestone streets, the scene began to settle. Families continued their tours, snapping photos and chatting happily. But Oliver kept glancing back at the guard, wondering if he'd ever see him again. Little did he know, this encounter was only the beginning of a connection that would grow stronger over time and leave a lasting impact on both of their lives. The moment Captain Thomas Reed accepted the origami crane from Oliver, it was as though a ripple had spread through the entire atmosphere. What started as a quiet, almost private exchange between a boy and a guard quickly turned into something much bigger, a shared experience that captivated everyone present. The tourists who had been casually snapping photos of the palace gates now found themselves fully invested in the unfolding scene. Parents nudged each other, whispering excitedly about what they'd just witnessed, while children giggled and pointed at the guard who had dared to break character. But the story didn't end there. Within minutes, videos of the interaction began appearing online. Someone in the crowd had filmed the whole thing on their phone. Oliver holding up the paper crane, the guard hesitating for a split second before accepting it, and the delighted smile that lit up the boy's face afterward. The clip was short but powerful, capturing the essence of human connection in its purest form. It wasn't long before social media platforms were buzzing with reactions. Some viewers praised the guard for his kindness, calling him a hero and saying his response had restored their faith in humanity. Others argued that breaking protocol, even for something as sweet as this, set a bad example. Debates erupted across comment sections. Should royal guards remain completely stoic at all times, or should they be allowed to show a softer side when appropriate? While opinions varied, one thing was clear. The video struck a chord with people around the world. Millions watched it, shared it, and discussed it, turning a simple act of kindness into a global conversation. Back at the barracks, Captain Reed faced scrutiny from his superiors. That evening, after his shift ended, he was called into a meeting with the commanding officer. The room was tense as Reed stood at attention, waiting for the verdict. His superior, Colonel Matthews, played the video on a laptop screen, pausing it at the exact moment Reed accepted the crane. "Explain yourself," Matthews said sternly, though there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Reed took a deep breath before speaking. "Sir, I understand I broke protocol," he began, his voice steady. But the boy's gesture, it wasn't disruptive or disrespectful. It was genuine. He saw me not as a statue or a symbol, but as a person. And for a brief moment, I chose to honor that. There was silence in the room as Matthews considered his words. Finally, the colonel leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You know the rules exist for a reason," he said. "But sometimes bending them can remind people why we're here in the first place." To Reed's relief, no formal punishment followed. Instead, the incident became a topic of discussion among the guards themselves. Some admired his decision, admitting they might have done the same in his position. Others remained cautious, warning that such actions could set a dangerous precedent. Regardless of where they stood, everyone agreed on one thing. The public reaction proved that moments like these mattered more than they realized. For Oliver's family, the aftermath was overwhelmingly positive. Strangers approached them during their visit, complimenting Oliver on his thoughtfulness and thanking him for reminding everyone of the importance of kindness. His parents beamed with pride as they recounted the story over dinner that night. "Did you know your little gift made headlines?" his mom teased gently. Oliver shrugged, clearly pleased, but still innocent to the magnitude of what had happened. To him, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making someone smile. As days passed, the buzz surrounding the event began to fade, but its impact lingered. For Captain Reed, it served as a reminder that even the smallest acts of humanity could leave a lasting impression. And for Oliver, it planted a seed of confidence that being kind, brave, and curious could change the way people saw the world, even if only for a moment. But neither of them knew yet that this encounter was far from over. Their paths would cross again, weaving together a story that neither could have anticipated. A few days after the viral video of Oliver and Captain Thomas Reed made headlines, the young boy returned to the palace with his family. This time, he came prepared, not with a stick or idle curiosity, but with a new handmade gift. Clutching a colorful drawing in his small hands, Oliver was eager to see if the guard who had accepted his origami crane would remember him. His parents exchanged amused glances as they approached the gates, knowing how much this visit meant to their son. The crowd around the palace seemed livelier than usual. Tourists whispered excitedly about the guard who smiled and pointed at the spot where the now famous interaction had taken place. Some even lingered near the guards, hoping to catch another glimpse of humanity beneath the stoic exterior. But for Oliver, it wasn't about fame or spectacle. It was personal. He scanned the line of guards until his eyes landed on Captain Reed, standing tall and unmoving as always. Without hesitation, Oliver ran up to him, holding out his drawing. The picture showed the guard holding the origami crane, surrounded by smiling children. Bright colors filled the page, and written in bold letters at the bottom were the words, "Thank you for being nice." The crowd nearby noticed immediately, and cameras quickly turned toward the scene. For a moment, Captain Reed remained still, his training kicking in as he processed the situation. Then, during a brief rotation break when he stepped aside momentarily, he bent down slightly to meet Oliver's gaze. "That's for you," Oliver said proudly, thrusting the drawing into the guard's hands. Reed took it carefully, inspecting the artwork with genuine appreciation. Despite the helmet obscuring most of his face, his gratitude shone through his eyes. "Thank you," he replied softly, his voice carrying just enough warmth to make the crowd erupt into applause. Parents cheered, children clapped, and some tourists even wiped away tears. It was a rare and beautiful moment, a reminder that kindness could bridge even the widest gaps. Word of the second encounter spread quickly. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing Oliver the little artist who melted the guard's heart. Social media buzzed again, with hashtags like #Kindeswins trending alongside photos of the drawing. People marveled at how a simple act of creativity had sparked such joy. Schools began using the story as an example of empathy and connection, while parents encouraged their own kids to find ways to brighten someone else's day. For Captain Reed, these interactions became a turning point. Though he continued to uphold his duties with discipline, he found himself more attuned to the people around him. He realized that maintaining tradition didn't mean shutting out humanity. In fact, moments like these strengthened the bond between the guards and the community they served. Other guards started noticing subtle changes too. Some began offering polite nods or slight smiles during breaks, inspired by Reed's example. Oliver, meanwhile, became a regular visitor to the palace. Each time he came, he brought something new: a painting, a poem, or even a handmade bracelet. The guards grew accustomed to seeing him, and though none broke character quite as openly as Reed had, they couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth whenever the cheerful boy appeared. Over time, a unique friendship blossomed between Oliver and the captain. They never spoke at length. Reed's role demanded silence, but their exchanges were meaningful nonetheless. One afternoon, as Oliver handed over yet another gift, Reed knelt down briefly and said, "You remind me why we do what we do." It was a rare admission, spoken quietly so only Oliver could hear. The boy beamed, not fully understanding the weight of the words but feeling their sincerity. To him, the guard wasn't just a symbol of authority. He was a friend who listened, even when he couldn't talk. As weeks turned into months, the bond between them grew stronger. What started as a playful test of boundaries had evolved into something deeper, a mutual respect that transcended age, rank, and tradition. For Oliver, visiting the palace became less about curiosity and more about connection. And for Captain Reed, each interaction served as a reminder that behind every uniform was a person capable of compassion, humor, and warmth. Little did they know, their story was far from over. While the world celebrated their unlikely friendship, neither Oliver nor Reed anticipated the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Their journey was proof that even the smallest seeds of kindness could grow into something extraordinary, leaving a legacy that would inspire generations to come. As the months passed, the bond between Oliver and Captain Thomas Reed deepened in ways no one could have predicted. What began as a curious child testing the limits of a stoic guard had transformed into a genuine friendship that touched the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Each time Oliver visited the palace, he brought something new: a hand-drawn picture, a small origami animal, or even a note scribbled with words like, "You're my favorite guard." While Reed remained bound by his duties, he found subtle ways to show his appreciation. A nod here, a slight tilt of his head there. It was enough for Oliver to know the feeling was mutual. Their connection didn't go unnoticed. Other guards started referring to Oliver as the Little Ambassador, a nickname earned not just because of his frequent visits, but also because of how he seemed to bring out the best in everyone around him. Parents visiting the palace often encouraged their own children to approach the guards with kindness, inspired by Oliver's example. Some kids mimicked his gestures, offering handmade crafts or simply smiling up at the towering figures. Slowly but surely, the once intimidating presence of the royal guards became a source of fascination and warmth for families. For Captain Reed, these interactions changed the way he viewed his role. He realized that being a guard wasn't just about standing tall and protecting the palace. It was also about representing humanity. The strict rules and rigid protocols were important, yes, but they didn't have to overshadow compassion. In fact, moments of connection like those with Oliver reinforced the trust and admiration people had for the guards. Reed began sharing this perspective with his fellow soldiers during training sessions, encouraging them to find balance between discipline and empathy. "We're not just statues," he would say. "We're people too." But the impact went beyond the palace gates. News outlets continued to follow Oliver and Reed's story, highlighting it as an example of how simple acts of kindness could bridge divides. Schools invited Oliver to speak about his experiences, and teachers used the story in classrooms to teach lessons on courage, creativity, and respect. One school even organized a Crafts for Guards Day, where students made cards and drawings to deliver to local law enforcement and military personnel. It was heartwarming to see how one boy's curiosity had sparked a movement that extended far beyond the palace walls. Despite the growing attention, Oliver remained humble. To him, the visits weren't about fame or recognition. They were about making someone's day brighter. His parents often joked that he thought of Captain Reed as a pen pal who happened to wear a fancy uniform. And while Reed couldn't engage in lengthy conversations, he found ways to communicate through actions. Once, during a particularly cold winter morning, he discreetly handed Oliver a wrapped candy during a brief break, earning gasps of delight from the crowd. Another time, he arranged for Oliver to receive a small tour of the palace grounds, an experience the boy talked about for weeks. As Oliver grew older, his interests began to shift. He started school activities, joined sports teams, and made new friends. His visits to the palace became less frequent, though he never forgot the guard who had accepted his crane all those years ago. On special occasions, like holidays or birthdays, he still returned with a gift, ensuring that their unique friendship stayed alive. For Captain Reed, these moments were a reminder of why he loved his job, not just for the honor of serving his country, but for the unexpected joys it brought into his life. Though their encounters became fewer over time, the legacy of their bond endured. Tourists still gathered near the palace gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous guard and the boy who had melted his stern exterior. Photographs of Reed accepting Oliver's gifts hung in local cafes and museums, celebrating the power of human connection. And for both Oliver and Reed, the memories of their shared moments served as a testament to the idea that even in the most formal settings, kindness could shine through and change lives forever. The story of Oliver and Captain Thomas Reed became more than just a heartwarming tale. It sparked conversations about tradition, humanity, and the delicate balance between the two. As news of their interactions continued to spread, people from all walks of life weighed in on what it meant to uphold duty while remaining approachable. Some argued that the guard's stoic demeanor was essential to maintaining respect and order, while others believed that moments like these reminded everyone that behind the uniforms were real people with feelings and hearts. For Captain Reed, the experience forced him to reflect deeply on his role. He had always taken pride in his work, knowing that his presence symbolized strength, discipline, and loyalty. But Oliver's kindness taught him something new. That true strength wasn't just about standing firm. It was also about knowing when to soften. By accepting the origami crane and later engaging with Oliver in small but meaningful ways, Reed realized he wasn't betraying his responsibilities. He was enhancing them. His actions showed the public that the guards weren't distant figures to be feared, but individuals who cared about the community they served. This shift in perspective didn't go unnoticed among his fellow guards. At first, some were hesitant to follow Reed's example, worried about breaking protocol or facing criticism. But as they saw how positively the public responded to Reed's subtle gestures, his nods, his brief moments of acknowledgement, they began to adopt similar approaches during their own shifts. One guard started offering polite smiles during rotation breaks, while another exchanged quick waves with children. These small acts didn't compromise their professionalism. Instead, they humanized it. Tourists often left the palace gates saying things like, "They're not just guards, they're people too." Parents especially appreciated this change. Many brought their kids to the palace specifically to teach them about respect and gratitude, using the guards as examples of both discipline and kindness. Teachers incorporated the story into lessons on empathy, encouraging students to think about how they could make someone else's day better. Even local businesses joined in, hosting events where children created handmade gifts for frontline workers as a tribute to Oliver's original gesture. The ripple effect of one boy's curiosity was felt far beyond the palace walls. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Captain Reed himself. Before meeting Oliver, he had seen his job as purely functional, a series of tasks performed with precision and dedication. Now, he understood that his role extended beyond protecting the palace. He was also a bridge between tradition and humanity. This realization stayed with him long after Oliver's visits became less frequent. On quiet days, when the cobblestone streets were empty and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant footsteps, Reed would think about the boy who had changed his outlook on life. Even years later, Reed found himself inspired by Oliver's courage. He began mentoring younger guards, sharing stories of how a single act of kindness could leave a lasting impression. Rules are important, he would tell them, but so is connection. Never underestimate the power of a smile or a nod. It can mean the world to someone. His words resonated deeply, shaping the next generation of guards into not just protectors but ambassadors of goodwill. As time went on, the debates about whether guards should maintain absolute rigidity faded. People came to understand that tradition and humanity weren't opposing forces. They could coexist harmoniously. And while there were still rules to follow and protocols to uphold, the guards learned that bending slightly toward compassion didn't weaken their image, it strengthened it. They became symbols not just of authority but of warmth, proving that even the smallest gestures could inspire trust and admiration. For Captain Reed, the lesson was clear. Sometimes, breaking character wasn't about neglecting duty. It was about fulfilling it in ways no one expected. And though Oliver had grown older and moved on to new adventures, the memories of their friendship remained etched in Reed's heart, reminding him every day of the incredible power of kindness.